Welcome to Postwave. You're here with Eric and Trevor. So, Eric, what's this past week, half a week, been like for you since all this shit happened last week? I know you don't pay attention to news maybe as much as I do, but
Basically, absolutely nothing has changed in my life.
yeah, yeah,
I still go to work. I still teach my music as meditation class. I still
yeah.
do stuff on the internet.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess nothing about my day-to-day activities has super much changed for me, but this is going to be a rare case of us recording an episode the week it's released, because usually we record them at least like a few weeks, if not a month in advance, right?
Yeah.
So we're recording this on January 11th, which is the Monday after the Wednesday where the Capitol got stormed, and people have been throwing different words around, but either like an insurrection or a seditious conspiracy, some kind of thing has happened.
So, Trevor, I have been living under a rock. I have not been paying attention to what's happening. Can you give me the rundown, the Cliff Notes version of what's happened?
Okay. How long have you been under the rock for?
So, a long time. All I know is that like Trump was like saying that his supporters should go storm the Capitol or like go there and do what you have to do, and that then they like broke in and like the senators were hiding under the desks and stuff.
Yeah. So okay. So we had this election back in November, right? And even before that, Trump was saying that he was gonna challenge the results and that it was rigged and everything. And didn't concede on election night, still hasn't conceded, and keeps just pushing Republicans to, at the very, very next chance, stop Biden from being sworn in as president. So, whether through intimidating election officials in certain states like Georgia, or, telling Mike Pence to just overturn the states that didn't elect him. He's been trying to sow basically like a coup to get him to stay in power. And it all kind of came to a head this past Wednesday when he had this rally on the day that this pretty like run-of-the-mill kind of formal step of electoral votes being certified in Congress was happening. And basically, I mean, so the whole thing here is that it's blurry whether he actually, like, how much he actually incited the crowd at the rally to go do what they did. But he and Rudy Giuliani were using a lot of kind of like battle analogies and war analogies in their speeches, and they did say peaceful at some point, but it was kind of like a cover your ass type thing where the general, I think the general intent was clear. But no matter what they said in the speech, it was clear that a lot of people came there with the prior intent of having some kind of forced entry into the Capitol building.
So they made it into the building, and the guards were like holding them off with pistols or something like that, right?
Well, actually, so this is part of it. Like the Capitol Police, I think the head of that whole department resigned because there was some kind of like some officers were actually like helping them break in a little bit, or not not resisting as much as they should have been. Yeah, so a lot of people are drawing comparisons to all the protests against police brutality that happened this past summer, and pointing out how much more leniently the police treated these protesters at the Capitol than they treated the protesters against police brutality back last year.
Totally. I think that seems to be a really valid observation.
Yeah.
So what happened after that? So they broke in, the senators are hiding under the desk. Then what?
So, I mean, people were stealing things and vandalizing things and smearing shit, like literal shit, on things, I heard.
Mm-hmm.
And, like 5 people died.
Five people, like in the rioters, or?
Well, I think I don't know if we know the full details yet, but I think the last I heard, like 3 people died from medical emergencies. One officer died, and then one protester died of I think a gunshot wound.
Okay.
So yeah, so serious shit.
Yes.
And people were like, they had like zip tie handcuffs, and they were actively chanting like hang Mike Pence, that kind of thing.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, kind of crazy shit.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is kind of crazy. All this stuff, it's weird. It's kind of scary. What are the greater implications of it to you?
Well, I think like the biggest implication is just that democracy is fragile, and then we take this system that we have for granted because it's been here since way before we were born. Sean Carroll just did a really good like solo podcast episode on this where he's just talking about democracy, and he was saying like, yeah, as long as the system of government began before you were born, you're going to see it as like immutable and something that's never going to change. But almost all civilizations fall at some point, and it's very possible it could happen to us.
Totally.
But I think maybe the slightly less grand implication is that our society is just so freaking fractured along ideological lines, and people have such like diametrically opposed beliefs which have been, as we'll get into later, which have been definitely exacerbated by the internet. And that's just going to make it so much harder for us to find any kind of like political equanimity or anything like that.
Gotcha.
But I guess so like a third implication for me personally, I was just thinking about all the stuff we've been talking about these past few weeks with the intellectual dark web. And for anyone that's listening, I think maybe I mentioned this already, but we've been recording this series of episodes on the intellectual dark web, which is this kind of centrist liberal mostly movement that sprung up in the last last decade or so, kind of focused around the ideas of combating political correctness and kind of reining in far left ideology, that kind of thing. And it just seemed tone deaf to put all that stuff out there without kind of addressing what's happening right now, because I think it's pretty relevant. I think part of it is also that since we started recording the series of episodes, which I think now is like up to 5 or 6 maybe.
Well, we did 2 on the intellectual dark web, and then 1 on Jordan Peterson and 1 on Sam Harris.
Yeah, I think the Sam Harris one turned into 2 though.
2-parter,
well. Yeah. So 5, and we might do an atheism episode, which is kind of maybe related. But yeah, my thinking on the whole thing has kind of been evolving as we've been doing it, and I've been talking to like close friends about it, and I think my thinking has kind of evolved, and so I think it would be good to kind of like have a preamble to this whole series.
Totally.
Where we kind of like look back on it and kind of go into if our thinking has changed at all.
Yeah, that's really cool. So where would you see is the biggest connection between the current events happening in the Capitol and the intellectual dark web as we've discussed it?
So like I said, a lot of people are comparing the police response to the riot that happened at the Capitol to the response that happened to the protests against police violence or police brutality that happened over the summer. And yeah, I mean there's tons of footage, you can go look it up, of dealing pretty roughly with protesters over the summer, and driving into crowds, and like I said, at the Capitol, like some officers were well, for one, there wasn't just like, I mean, there have been pictures of the Capitol during the Black Lives Matter protests, and then pictures during the the events that happened last Wednesday, and it's not even close, to the level of like there was far more police presence during the protests last year, it seemed like.
Mm. So you're saying that there's a definite imbalance when you look at the actual turnout, the actual footage of left protests against police brutality versus these right-wing extremist protests against whatever you want to, against democracy.
Yeah, well, against Joe Biden's election, I think is really what they're protesting. Yeah,
fair enough.
Yeah, and I am kind of conscious. I am kind of cautious about making comparisons because I don't think the two situations are necessarily totally parallel. But I do think it points out a lot of imbalances in the way police force is used.
Why do you think there's an imbalanced response?
I mean, that's a good question. So I guess that the most obvious answer is that most of these. Well, I mean, all they were all conservative. Most of them were white at this protest last week, and just the fact that that's the group of people that were protesting, I think had a lot to do with it. And then maybe the police were more sympathetic to that viewpoint. And also, I mean, all the police brutality movement protests were focused like specifically on the police as an entity. So and the protests that happened last week were focused at the government, which is, I guess, technically like kind of the same entity as the police in some way, but not like directly.
They have their own personalities, their own sense of identity.
Yeah.
And you think that maybe the cops are more conservative leaning. Maybe a lot of them share the same ideologies as the rioting crowd, so they kind of swept it under the rug a little bit.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, there's lots of conflicting reports, and I don't know about swept under the rug, but I heard some police officers were like letting people, just kind of like opening doors for people and that kind of thing, which could be hearsay. I'll have to look that one up. And like I said, like I think one officer died in the protests, and then I think another one committed suicide today, and they don't, of course they don't really know the circumstances behind that yet. But yeah, I don't want to imply that the officers who were there didn't suffer, or a lot of them weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. But yeah, I mean, I think that the chief of the Capitol Police resigned.
So how does this apparent imbalance between the reaction against the Trump protests and the Black Lives Matter protests relate to the Coleman Hughes article that you shared with me during the Intellectual Dark Web episode? Yeah,
so one of the main things we talked about is this article by, like you said, by Coleman Hughes, who's this philosophy graduate from Columbia University. Young black dude, went to Juilliard for trombone performance for a while, and then kind of switched gears because I think Juilliard was too conservative. But kind of the thrust of the article is that it's possible that we're being slightly misled about how prevalent police violence against unarmed black people is in the U.S. as compared to police violence against unarmed white people. And Coleman Hughes isn't. I think most people wouldn't consider him technically part of the intellectual dark web, but he's running around in the same circles and doing interviews with all the same people and like Brett Weinstein and Sam Harris, and I think they've kind of like taken him under their wings. So I guess kind of my point is that on the whole, I think I still stand by the article because it's pretty. It hedges a lot of its bets. Like it kind of qualifies a lot of things, and when you actually look at it, it's pretty moderate. And I guess kind of what I worried about is like why are you making this like slight critique of like why are you choosing to use your time to make this like slight critique of the Black Lives Matter movement when the article pretty much agrees that there's still a problem with police brutality in the U.S. even if it's not translating into like disproportionately high deaths of unarmed black people as opposed to unarmed white people. Like why are you choosing to talk so long about this slight little difference when there's obviously like huge problems with white supremacy and fascism in the US and that kind of thing.
Well, so what would you say is the truth of the article? What is this perceived difference that he's drawing attention to?
Well, I think the main truth is we just actually don't know statistically if this idea that's kind of at the heart of the movement against police brutality is true, and that's the idea that if you're a black person in America, that you're, I think it's like twice as likely to be killed by the cops while unarmed, something like that. I think the chances for and I'm not forgetting if it's specifically men or all genders or whatever, but I think black men it's something like 1 in 1,000, and for white men it's about 1 in 2,000. So I think you could argue that both those numbers are like way too high, but basically the argument is if you adjust for crime rates and not if you adjust for number of interactions that those groups have with police, like per interaction, the bias kind of goes away, and it's actually that on average per interaction, unarmed white people are more likely to be killed by the cops, and so part of the issue is he cites these 4 studies, and I think I followed the links the first time I found this article, but I followed the links again this past week as I was thinking about all this stuff, and like one of them was literally retracted by the authors because they said it was getting cited way too often to make exactly this point that Coleman Hughes is making, that police brutality isn't as much of a problem. And then there's I've been on like Reddit threads and stuff, but there's criticisms of him for only citing these 4 studies to prove his point, and that in most social science that would be nowhere near sufficient. And there's also science isn't perfect; it's always being refined. And he even says in the article that he thinks more studies need to be done on this kind of thing.
That's kind of like the standard tag on the end of every paper, isn't it?
Every paper ever.
So do you think that it's actually harmful to be discussing this fact that we maybe don't know as surely as we would like to think, that the imbalance exists, or to what extent it exists?
Yeah, so that's kind of what I've been thinking about and wrestling with, right? Like the question of, do you even talk about this stuff, or like what's the use of talking about it? And the way I see it basically breaks down into like 4 different categories of effect. So like you could either persuade someone who's really radical left that there is actually like a debate to be had here. Like you don't have to just sign on to like the most radical ideas of the anti-police brutality movement, that there's some nuance and gray area there. So like that's one effect, right? And I think that's like one of the effects that Coleman Hughes is going for, and one of the effects that the intellectual dark web tries to go for in general is just kind of reining in the extreme left, ultimately with the goal, I think, of ultimately enacting more kind of liberal policies, because they can get conservatives to, or centrists to compromise on them if they're not so progressive, right?
If they're not so, is progressive the right word, or?
I think progressive, liberal, progressive.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's one category, and then the other. So another category would be like persuade people who are already kind of center left. I know I'm using left and right, which you don't like, but for the sake of this, just like I guess,
of course,
left versus right on this particular issue. So another thing it could do is persuade people who are already center left that they're in the right spot, and maybe they don't need to do as much on police brutality as a lot of their friends would suggest, right? Even if they acknowledge it's a problem, right? And that's kind of the effect that I worry about, because I feel like that's maybe the effect it had on me, because I do, as Coleman Hughes says in his article, like there's all these studies show, people of color are way more likely to be roughed up by the police and have excessive force used on them. Like that's kind of not not even a question. So like that alone, it's like, obviously this is important. So talking about the issue like this might just dissuade some people from who are, like I said, who are kind of center left from acting on it.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, so the other two, so like if they're center right, it's gonna maybe persuade them that there is something to be done about this issue, like it's that the left isn't just crazy, and that there actually are compromises that can make, which again I think is part of the goal of the IDW in general. But it could also, this is the fourth category, it could also make people who are really far conservative like more entrenched in their beliefs. Right? Because they just see it as more justification for their belief that police brutality isn't a problem.
Okay.
So I guess my question is how, like, in sharing this article and talking about it, how much change is being done in each category?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's a big question that, it would be really interesting to know the answer to.
Yeah. I mean, of course, it's hard to change people's minds at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like if some rabid extremist who doesn't think that police brutality against minorities is a problem thinks that, then aren't they still going to think that whether or not this article is out there?
I don't know. I mean, I think kind of what this gets to is I think the part of convincing anyone through argument is admitting that they're at least some of what they think is right, because no one believes, almost no one believes like 100% bullshit that's not true, right? Like there's usually some kernel of truth there. And maybe if we're talking about like flat earthers, it's like a lost cause, but
yeah.
So I think my hope is that some people would be brought in by the concessions that Hughes makes in this article.
So the way I look at this article, it seems to me valuable to have discussion and to cultivate a environment where different ideas can be shared and expressed. And if you have an environment that says, hey, we shouldn't talk about these sort of things, it could be dangerous, I think that is a less healthy sort of society, even if some of the ideas are dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sympathetic to that, and that is definitely kind of the stance of a lot of these IDW guys. But I think the question though is like dangerous for who?
Mm-hmm.
And the whole idea of privilege is that these discussions are not dangerous for us, really. Like the danger isn't, like for both of us, the level of racism in U.S. society has like a very small effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the level, whatever dials end up getting changed in those four categories from us talking about it or anyone talking about it, like our lives are not the ones that are kind of in balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that's kind of the problem with that.
Well, what about Coleman Hughes? Would you say his life is as affected as some of the people who are more in danger of police brutality?
I mean, yeah, I don't know all the details of his life, but I mean, he's like a mildly successful host of this podcast and went to like Columbia, and I mean, there's like some level of privilege there, right? It's not white privilege, obviously, but the people who are really affected by this stuff are tend to be people in the poorer areas of cities where there's more crime and there's more police presence.
So now this is just a totally uneducated idea. I have not done research, so I don't know if this is true, but I just want to propose to you the idea that maybe police brutality is biased against poverty, against people with lesser means, and as African Americans are more likely to be disproportionately lower income, then it would follow that they are more likely to be in danger.
Yeah, Yeah, and I mean, you could maybe make like a correlation versus causation argument there, because it's hard to know which one is really, which one is really causing. Which I don't know what I'm trying to say. I guess it's possible that systemic racism is causing both the poverty and the increased police presence, but the two aren't related directly. If that makes sense.
Totally.
But yeah, there is some kind of connection there, because like I said, a lot of the thrust of this argument that Hughes makes is that the high crime areas are the poor areas, and those tend to have a disproportionately larger Black and minority population. If you're finding this podcast valuable so far, we'd really appreciate if you consider supporting it somehow. You can follow us on social media on Instagram or Facebook. You can also go follow us on YouTube. You can subscribe to us on your favorite podcasting platform and give us a good rating there if you're on a platform that supports that. Also, please be aware that we are just a bunch of artists and musicians who like to talk about subjects that are sometimes slightly beyond our wheelhouse. If we say anything that's inaccurate or just flat out wrong, please send us a nice email at postwavepodcast@gmail.com and let us know what we missed. Thanks for listening.
So do you want to sort of start to transition toward the conspiracy theory sort of side of things?
Yeah. So maybe this is a good chance for us to get into the other part of what we're going to talk about today, which is conspiracies and conspiracy theories in general. And I think the reason I kind of started to think about that is I wondered if I was kind of falling into one of those as part of the intellectual dark web experience, because I feel like the whole thing is kind of like conspiracy theory light. Like it has the whole, like, everyone around you is a sheep and they're just doing what the rest of the people are doing, and you with your big rational brain can you can choose your own way and not listen to everyone else, and it does kind of, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I can see there's a connection there.
Yeah.
So you shared with me this podcast by Big Brains.
Big Brains.
Big Brains.
But University of Chicago, right? It's like the channel, I guess.
Yeah. And so they so would you say, so their sort of drive is they start by creating a dichotomy of rational people versus intuitive people. How do you feel about that?
I mean, all dichotomies break down at some point, but I thought it was a good distinction, and probably for most people they have a little bit of both, right? Or they're capable of thinking in both ways, but they might think in a rationalist way in a certain situation and an intuitionist way in another.
So what would be an example of a rational way of thinking versus an intuitive way?
Okay, so an example of intuitionist thinking is kind of this idea of purity that exists within a lot of religions.
Mm-hmm.
And they did this study that I'm not going to remember the exact details of, but it was like they asked people, would you rather stab this picture of your family 5 times or put your hand in a bowl of cockroaches?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And most people, a surprisingly large number of people will choose the cockroaches, because the idea of doing that to a picture of their family is just seems so wrong, even though it's just a piece of paper.
Mm. Now, I kind of take issue with the way they presented this idea. I totally see what they're getting at, that some people maybe make decisions based on symbolism that doesn't correlate to what follows rationally. But I really take issue with their supposition that the only rational explanation is the one that they thought of, and then that's what being rational is, and that any other sort of explanation is clearly irrational. For example, in this one with the picture, I thought that there's a really kind of obtuse breakdown. And no offense against you, this is for having shared this example, because this is a perfect example, I think, that really highlights the drive of their idea here. Now, I think the way, because if you look at it, the way this breaks down, so they have, on one hand, you could put your hand in a bowl of cockroaches, which would be an unpleasant experience. On the other hand, you could stab a picture of a family member. Now, their thinking is, oh, well, clearly nothing directly bad will happen from stabbing a picture of your family. It's just a picture after all. Therefore, one should do that rather than enduring minor discomfort for a little bit. But I think that completely fails to take into consideration some of the more indirect implications of stabbing a picture of your family member. For example, maybe that has a psychological effect on you. Maybe part of your psychology is built around, you have these guards within yourself where to stab a picture or to stab an image of your family, maybe that triggers you in certain ways that causes profound internal distress. And so even if you're stabbing a picture of a family member, while you're not actually harming the family member, you're still punching through that barrier that you've built within yourself to protect yourself. And so that may be more harmful in the long run. Therefore, it would be rational to not do that.
I guess I see your point, because the cockroaches thing is gross, but then it's over and there's no way that's going to like affect you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe it'll, be like an unpleasant memory, but it's not going to be like this psychological thing that festers and messes you up like 10 years later.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that. And all the other examples they gave were those like, do you have like similar feelings about?
I do have similar feelings. I think maybe some of them are more helpful than others, but I think for the most part, all of the examples they give fall into the same sort of, I want to say, arrogant supposition that their interpretation of what is logical, which is what, like the first logical chain that they've observed, they assume that that's the only one and the right one, and that everything other than that is illogical.
Yeah, they're kind of making an assumption that their own judgment is super objective.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so he goes on then, or I guess they go on and they extend the assumption that the people who are prone to believe in conspiracy theories are irrational because they do what they consider to be the intuitive thinking.
Right. They'll just like see something that resonates with them as true, and then believe it just based on that, rather than like digging into all the details.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think they have a point, and I think that the other article we were looking at,
Internet fuels conspiracy theories.
Oh yeah. So this other article we were looking at on the conversation website talked a lot about how once people have these kind of intuitive feelings that a certain idea is right, like, oh, it would make sense if there was this like shadowy person called Q, like working within the deep state or whatever to control everything. Like that does make a little bit of sense. And then
Star Trek.
Q.
Yeah.
I'm not.
There's a guy
I haven't
called
seen a
the
lot of Star
Q
Trek.
who's just like this interdimensional immortal guy, and he just shows up and screws with everything.
It's possible if it's a reference. But like they have this intuition that like, oh, that makes so many things make sense, and like everything kind of seems like it clicks into place, and then they're able to join these online communities now where it's just kind of an echo chamber, and they only get reinforced and not these beliefs only get reinforced and not challenged.
Yeah, right. They sort of tune out anything that disagrees with them.
Right.
No, I think you're right. I think there is definitely a point to be made here. It seems pretty clear that this is something that people do, and probably quite a number of people do. My only contention with this assumption in the article is they present it as if anyone who believes in a conspiracy theory is doing this, is being irrational and being the opposite pole of rational, which they put forward as being intuitional. Yeah,
and there are definitely some quote unquote conspiracy theories that turn out to be true, right? It's not that all conspiracy theories are false.
Definitely.
Which is part of the problem.
Yeah, if only there weren't those conspiracies, then we'd all be peachy.
Yeah. So maybe we should say, I mentioned QAnon briefly, but maybe we should say how that explicitly ties into the insurrection thing that happened last week.
Sure, please.
So QAnon is this I guess you'd call it far right movement that grew up in these last few years after the whole Pizzagate scandal, if people remember that.
Pizzagate? What's that?
Yeah, oh, you don't hear about that? Okay. So this was like, I think during the Hillary Clinton election, and there was some pizza place in, I think DC, maybe somewhere else, but there was this conspiracy theory that it was like the front for a pedophilia ring, and that it was orchestrated by all the big Democratic names, and there's some other way crazier stuff involved that I'm forgetting about, but that was like the gist of it. And somehow out of that, I think, cannibalism. There's cannibalism in there somewhere.
What? Is this fact or just a conspiracy?
Oh, it's a conspiracy theory. Yeah. Although I think, I'm trying to remember, I think in Pizzagate, like, someone actually died, though. Like, it was, again, like, real shit. So this all kind of happened around WikiLeaks releasing the emails of John Podesta, who is Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, and this is back in 2016 during that election. And so people who subscribe to this conspiracy theory were saying that you could find in those emails coded messages saying that there were a bunch of high-ranking Democratic Party officials that were involved in this sex ring that I mentioned. And also along with that this pizza place in DC was involved. And so this all kind of spun out on 4chan and 8chan and kind of devolved into this QAnon thing. QAnon also accuses a bunch of high-ranking Democrats as being involved in this cannibalistic pedophile cult, and so that the extra thing with QAnon is that there's this individual named Q that's inside the government, or the deep state, I guess some people would say, and that's sending these coded messages to people, and coded and non-coded, because there actually is someone on 4chan and 8chan who is claiming to be this person. And so yeah, they're keeping these predictions of what will happen, and stay calm because Trump's going to remain in office somehow. Like, I'm affecting things in the right way. You just need to do what I tell you to do, that kind of thing. And yeah, I mean, it's crazy.
Okay, so this sort of self confirmation bias mentality is the same sort of driving force behind why a lot of people are so vehement about trying to support Trump in this coup.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere like this whole insurrection thing wasn't entirely QAnon, but it wouldn't have happened without QAnon. Like, it was kind of an essential part of it, or what made it like light off in the way that it did.
Wow, interesting. So yeah, I think it's totally valid that this is a thing that's happening. So going back to that Big Brains article, I just want to sort of put forward another idea that I think they kind of don't acknowledge. So in making the assumption that people who believe in conspiracy theories are reacting in this sort of impulsive way, I think they entirely fail to recognize that there are different sorts of camps. There's different sorts of approaches to quote unquote believing in conspiracy theories. So for one, there's the people who, believe based on their emotion and try to find an explanation for why they feel a certain way, and then will believe anything that supports that, or whatever explanation seems like that they feel like. Totally seems like that's a thing that happens. But there's also people who might believe things someone would consider to be a conspiracy theory on the grounds that they're doing research, they're learning about the world, and they have received information. Their trusted information sources are different from the mainstream or from other groups.
Right. And that's kind of where I end up with the IDW people is this like this isolated group of people who are kind of in an echo chamber, or is it just like a like different group of experts, that kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so hard to tell. Like what's who can you trust, right? Whose sources of information are valid, and who has an ulterior motive or no motive at all, just lack of forethought.
Right. I think we talked about this at some point, or we will talk about this at some point in these future episodes. But just about the idea of that at some level you have to trust authority to tell you what to believe, like no matter what, especially when science is involved, because unless you're a scientist, you kind of have to trust scientists to interpret the data for you and tell you what the implications are.
Yeah, right. Like that's the point of specialization.
Exactly. Yeah.
Totally. And then the question is like, who do you choose to believe? And you can rationally choose to believe completely different sources, based entirely on logic, and come to wildly different conclusions about why the world is shaped the way it is, or how the world is shaped.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think to completely discredit anyone who doesn't believe in the mainstream narrative is an oversight.
Yeah, totally. And I'm sure almost everyone has some kind of belief that they think, most of my friends are wrong about this, but I'm right. Mm-hmm. That kind of thing. Totally. Like, I'm sure most people have one of those.
Yeah.
And yeah, even if it's not friend groups, but just like, in the country, like, or in the world. Yeah, the majority opinion isn't always the right one.
Totally.
It's definitely true, right?
Yeah. And so I just want to present, so there's one more category that I see that is also not being recognized in this Big Brains podcast, which is that it's kind of possible to walk the fence. You can say, look at all these differing information sources. There are some that may seem more trustworthy to me than others, but I don't know what's what really. So it's possible then to recognize that there are many different explanations that are possible, are plausible, even some of the more outlandish ones, or even some of the more conspiratorial ones could potentially be viable, and to recognize that it's a possibility. Now, you can do this on a completely blank slate sort of Like, oh, I don't know. Could be the Earth is flat. I don't know. Could be whatever. So I think once you recognize this, that you can't really trust any sources of information 100%, and you sort of have to pick and choose which sources you are going to think are more plausible than others. Now you have to choose, right? And you could come at this with an entirely open mind. You could say that so long as there aren't any logical fallacies in or contradictions in any particular source of information or stance, then you can conceive it as a possibility and say, hey, the jury's out, that might be true. Now, I think it's also possible to be rational. I think it's possible for a rational mind to formulate a model of the world to help us predict likely causes of current situations intuitively without relying on data sources that are almost certainly incomplete and inaccurate, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, there's just so much that we don't know that we have to be open to things being true that would just seem totally outlandish and crazy right now.
Yeah, totally. And I think that actually one really valuable place that we can learn about how the world is shaped today is by looking historically and seeing what are some of the moving forces that have often been present in political structures in the past.
Mm-hmm. Like, what would some examples be?
So, for example, historically, Jewish people who lived in both Christian and Muslim communities were a minority within the group, and they were discriminated against pretty consistently throughout the last several thousand years.
Right.
There were stereotypes about them that they were rich, controlling, inhuman things. And so, there's a lot of racial tension throughout history in communities between Jews and Christians, or Jews and Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
Now, something that the ruling bodies would do very frequently is to indulge that sort of bias and racism and sanction violence against the Jews as a way to divert energy or divert attention from themselves as being the true cause of why the people, don't have enough food, for example. And so this sort of cold-hearted Machiavellian sort of maneuver where they're allowing people to become inflamed and do horrendous violence against an innocent minority is historically pretty commonplace in any ruling body. Mm-hmm. So then if we look today at many situations and we have a ruling body, we might say that they are as likely to do something as immoral as that, and so it's probably not safe to trust them as, looking out for our backs.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and in the U.S., I think the obvious example to go to is slavery, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how the effects of that. The Civil War ended. What would that be now? Like 140 years ago? No, 150. Anyway, it's like the effects are still echoing because like immediately following that was Reconstruction and Jim Crow, and then that kind of persisted all the way until the 60s, right? And that's when like the conservative movement in the US kind of started, like in opposition to these protests for equal rights.
Yeah, I think that's a totally valid observation.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that really stands out to me is the whole Epstein thing. Which
Yeah, I mean that's an example of something that was labeled a conspiracy, but like was true, right?
yeah, totally.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's not that these these sex rings don't exist. It's that you know they're probably looking for them in the wrong places with the whole QAnon thing.
I mean, who's to say though, right? Like,
Yeah.
maybe they are. Maybe, I mean, it is the rich and powerful who are involved in these sex rings, right? It's,
Yeah.
the people I don't want to name because I am just a humble proletariat and don't want to have my life ruined by some rich lawyer.
Yeah. So I guess one thing I wanted to mention on this video and the whole rationality versus intuitionist thing, I do wonder if, even though all these IDW guys are, I mean, they make such a big deal about, being free thinkers and thinking rationally and thinking for themselves, but I kind of wonder if, quote unquote, thinking for yourself implies some kind of use of intuition, right? Like, isn't what that means? Like, you think something is right because you have a gut feeling.
Yeah, totally.
That, whether it could be, based on evidence that you've seen, but it's still like, that's still your gut, right?
You're so spot on. Doesn't this go right back to our discussion about Terence McKenna and his views on intuition?
Yeah. Remind me though.
Yeah, so he was talking about intuition, and he kind of pointed out that in the West we have a perception of intuition as being weak and feminine and irrational, and yet he points out how it's a very important aspect of mathematical thinking, of developing new branches of math, and that intuition can work in conjunction with logic.
Yeah, because you have to have these leaps that you can't quite explain because no one else has explained them before.
Totally.
Right, it just has to like click for you and pop into your head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that there's a place for logic in that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and that's one of the things that kind of grinded my gears about the big brains, is that they have this dichotomy, right? Rational versus irrational. And it kind of fails to take into account that, their spectrum is rational versus intuitive, which they sort of use as a proxy to mean irrational. Mm-hmm. And they don't recognize that intuitiveness can be entirely used in conjunction with rationality.
Yeah, and yeah, like I kind of said, intuition is inward and trusting your gut. And I think the more I think about it, I think the more rationality has to do with social and intellectual interaction with other people, because that's how you ultimately get to what we would consider rational, right? Like, it's objective. And the only way you can do that is by like talking to other people and agreeing what is rational, because that's what it means to be rational. It means that, everyone can kind of, like, I guess it means like following the rules of logic. But the idea of something being rational is that it's like objectively true in a sense.
It's verifiable, right? Anyone can look at the facts, and if the conclusion is true, then if you follow logic, then you will come to that conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
So I would posit that it's more rational to recognize the limitations of one's own knowledge and to entertain the possibility of multiple explanations rather than to assume the most direct answer is the correct one.
Yeah, I think it's always good to be skeptical.
Yeah, skeptical, but like open-minded skeptical, right?
Yeah. Which it was really hard to do, especially when the issues get really like close to home and charged and personal, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, why do they get so? I mean, I guess in certain situations where like it directly affects your life, it would make sense that it would be personal, but do you think a lot of people who buy into various conspiracy theories, why do you think it feels to them as if it directly affects their lives?
I guess it depends on the conspiracy theory.
Mm.
I mean, in the QAnon case, I think, they're worried that this satanic cult is going to like take over the US if they don't do something, I guess, would be the...
So they feel that their livelihood is threatened, their security is threatened.
Yeah. Trump is like this authoritarian figure that they've latched on to. And I think that has a lot to do with it, which is, it's really fucking scary how enamored people are with him. Like the way they just kind of go along with whatever he says, and
yeah,
like the level of his charisma is apparently insane for like a subset of people.
I wonder if maybe it's just that, there's a problem in the US and Trump is aware of it and comes along at the right moment to say, hi, I'm the solution to the problem. I recognize that there is a problem. And I mean, it's kind of like par for the course for that. Like, that's what politicians do. And a lot of people buy into it. They say, hey, this guy's the solution to all the problems that we're having. Let's trust him. Because sometimes the majority group is wrong. But then, and that's totally true. And then how do you tell the difference between when you're in the minority that's right and when you're just making things up?
Right. Because in general, like, rationality is something that the majority can agree on by definition. So it's going to have to be like debated and worked out, and between like different people. It's not going to magically spring into someone's head.
Well, I think one of the things we've learned from today, from our discussion, is that what one person can assume is rational is not always the most rational, and generally, the most direct assumption isn't necessarily the most rational assumption.
Yeah, we could talk about the definition of rational, and I'm sure we'll get into critical theory in the next string of episodes. Rest assured, but that's rationality is one of the things I think people will criticize as part of that, as being a very, at least the way it's used, it's a very like Western construction.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've definitely had heated discussions with people who are very opposed to logic, to rationality as being the central organizing principle for your mind and your political stances. And this is totally a kind of a frustrating discussion to have as someone who puts my faith in the power of rationality and logic. But, the more I have those discussions and the more we have this discussion, I'm starting to come to recognize the shortcomings of what people refer to as rationality, and that maybe like people who assume that the most direct, most obvious thing is the truth are giving rationality a bad name.
So for all our listeners who listen to the ends of the episodes, thanks for sticking with us, and just know to take everything we talk about for these next few episodes or so, take it with like a large grain of salt.
A large salt crystal.
Yeah.
One thing I thought would be fun, if you like, we could throw it in anywhere, or, if it doesn't fit, that's fine too. But we could maybe just real quick run down a list of conspiracy theories and just like say how reasonable or how likely we think they are.
Okay, yeah, no, I have a list too.
Cool. I didn't actually write down a list, so maybe we'll go down your list.
Okay. So I mean, the first one I could think of is anti-vaxxers.
Ooh, fuck. Oh man, that hits hard.
Yeah, does that hit close to home?
Very close to home. When I was a kid, I wasn't.
Yeah.
I wasn't vaccinated.
Oh
Yeah.
shit. Was that like part of the Christian Science thing?
In part, but also, buying into the hype. And even today, I don't know who to trust. I've seen a huge majority of the evidence will say specifically that the vaccines cause autism thing is total bullshit, and that was just one guy making shit up. Like, that's like wildly the consensus. And so that seems pretty likely to me that that's true. On the other hand, we do know that vaccines can have side effects that, are many and varied and not beneficial.
Yeah.
Just look at some of the stuff for like the COVID vaccines that are being developed.
Yeah. Wait, so are you not vaccinated for anything?
I did later get some vaccines in my adult life.
Yeah. Right, like we have to get the meningitis one for school, right?
I honestly don't remember.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. There is the I'm forgetting the specific disease, but a lot of like vaccine trials have been done on African Americans. So there's like a history there of some like bad things that did happen. So I know a lot of African Americans are skeptical of vaccines kind of in general. So like there is some kind of basis for
Definitely.
it, but it can go. I mean, like, did you hear the whole like coronavirus 5G conspiracy theory?
No, what's that?
I'm not going to be able to remember exactly what the details are. Something with 5G being connected with like nanorobots to coronavirus. And there was this like picture that was going around of like a circuit diagram of one of these things, and it was like from some metal guitar pedal or something.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I love this.
Yeah.
Totally verifiably false.
Yeah.
Look into it and see it's not. Wonderful. That we can give that a bunk label.
Yeah.
Okay, how about 5G causes cancer a lot?
I'm going to say, yeah, not plausible at all on that one.
Really?
Yeah, I mean it's radio waves, right?
Now is it radio waves, or is it by that point? I'm pretty sure microwaves are used at least for 4G, or for wireless data. Microwaves, which are faster frequency, and there is, as far as I am aware, there's actually pretty robust data showing that microwaves can cause, cancer and birth defects and things like that. And when you expose yourself to very large doses of it, then you're increasing that risk.
Interesting. Yeah, honestly, I don't know anything about how 4G or 5G works, so I could be wrong there, but yeah, I guess that is a thing someone could potentially do a study on.
Yeah,
I guess,
and
try to get an answer.
Mm-hmm. And from what I've
pretty hard.
researched in the past, from pretty mainstream sources, even it's confirmed that the radio signals, or rather microwave signals emitted by your wireless devices, can cause cancer, and that's why they have the warnings, like don't hold it next to your head for very long, things like that.
Uh-huh.
Like they have to put those warnings in there because it's actually a real verified thing. It's just that in current doses, you have to be a heavy phone user in order to get the kind of exposure that puts you at risk for the most part.
Yeah, wow, that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. I'll have to look into that more now. I always dismissed that one. But
yeah. No, I give that a totally plausible, or if even a probable.
Okay, how about 9/11?
9/11 was an inside job?
Yeah, like some level of like Bush knew beforehand, all the way up to like it's an inside job completely.
Somewhere on that spectrum, I think is definitely a very plausible.
Mm-hmm.
I make no assertions one way or the other.
Yeah.
I simply don't know, and there's so many contradictory data.
Yeah, I'm kind of 50-50 on it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we do know that the Bush administration, or, someone in the Bush administration, and quite possibly it had to have been Bush himself, according to some sources, flew many members of the Saudi and bin Laden families out of the country, like a day or 2 days after 9/11, when all the flights were grounded, with no questions asked sort of deal, including 24 members of the bin Laden family. So,
wow, that's wild. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, flat Earth. We have to talk about flat Earth.
Yeah. What do you think about flat Earth?
Oh, I think it's very, very likely true.
Definitely. I'm convinced. I've seen a lot. I was skeptical, but then I saw a lot of YouTube videos about it.
Those pictures.
Yeah. One of the things I kind of love about flat Earth is they're so committed to and to the point where they're going into actual interesting math to try to verify. And you'll have the thing like, well, if you set up a pole on this point on the Earth, you expect the shadow to be falling a certain way. Or 2 poles, you expect the shadow to be falling a certain way if it's a sphere, and to fall different ways if it's flat. But what's so interesting is they've found like the place where it's true for both, and say, there, see, it's true for the. You can set them up so that if you set them up this particular way, then these shadows fall as you would expect them to on a flat surface. Mm-hmm. Therefore, it's true. I love it. There's so much stick-to-itiveness.
Yeah, they have an explanation for pretty much everything. Mm-hmm. It seems like.
Yeah. One of my favorites was they were trying to prove that the Earth is smaller than people say it is, and so they were doing that airplanes actually travel way slower than we think they do. Mm-hmm. And so he demonstrates this by having his brother in the car driving next to a runway at 40, 50 miles an hour, and the car is in the foreground and the plane is far in the background, and they have them driving, and it basically matches like the movement of the car across the screen is at the same speed as the plane across the screen. They're like, see, it's the same speed.
Wow. Okay, climate change.
Fake and gay. The Earth isn't dying. We're not all doomed.
No, agree with you on that one.
Yeah, and we had nothing to do it. Nothing at all. Yeah, it's totally natural. For those of you who aren't sure, we're joking on that one.
Yes. Oh, okay. We should finish with this one. Moon landing.
Okay. Well, what do you think? What have you heard?
I would say. I mean, I feel like there's like a 2% chance that it's right. Like I could see the appeal of it from like the U.S.'s government, the U.S. government's eyes at the time,
Mm-hmm.
And then but there's explanations for for everything. And yeah, I mean, I'm gonna walk back that 2% number probably.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember. I think there was some anecdote where Buzz Aldrin met like a moon landing denier or whatever, and he just like punched him in the face.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I could totally believe that the government would do something like faking the moon landing. It seems to me, as I agree, it's very improbable that that's what actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the actual data and evidence put forward by the conspiracy theorists, it's quite possible to refute them. Although they're pretty interesting explorations. And, this is actually one thing that I think Mythbusters actually did pretty well.
Yeah.
Their episode on this. They kind of go into the details of like how the exposure is a certain way, how the sky isn't showing up in the way you might expect.
Yeah. Okay, well, I said we were going to finish with that one, but we have to talk about aliens because that's like the biggest one.
Oh shit! Okay, aliens. What about them?
Well, okay, yeah. So I guess the conspiracy is that they're here and the government is keeping them a secret, or like we've had contact, or we've found like crashed spacecraft or alien bodies and whatever, and some version of the government knows about aliens that have visited the Earth and they're keeping it from us.
What do you think?
Okay, well, so I kind of dismissed the whole UFO thing for a long time. And then I'm going to forget this guy's name. There's like this Navy test pilot who's been doing all the rounds on like, Joe Rogan podcast and Lex Friedman's podcast and giving a lot of interviews about this phenomenon that he and like, I don't know, 3 or 4 other people he was with when they were flying these planes out on the West Coast saw. So they saw these objects that like, coming from people who have been around aircraft like their entire career, like behaved like nothing they'd ever seen before and was just, dropping ridiculous, accelerating in weird ways and like dropping really fast in altitude and like kind of just disappearing. And it's on a video too, it's always like kind of grainy, but yeah, like multiple sightings by multiple people. And I think what the government did either sometime in the last few years or so, they like acknowledged that these recordings were real, and they're like, yeah, we don't know what these are.
Do you have a source on that?
Yeah,
like
I'll find it.
Acknowledge that.
I'll find it. Yeah. Yeah, I forget the dude's name, but yeah. So, and then the other thing that maybe kind of consider it more is in the like one of the popular explanations is that these sightings started happening after World War II and when we used the nuclear weapon for the first time, and it just hit me like, wow, yeah, if I was a extraterrestrial civilization, that is exactly the moment I would start paying attention to what's going on. And sorry, I mean, yeah, that sounds pretty plausible to me, although I don't, that part of it at least. I would say like, yeah, I don't know, probably 50-50 if I'm being honest.
Wow. Fascinating. Yeah, I mean, totally. It's not something I can refute in the slightest bit. It's, I see no reason why that couldn't possibly be how things are.
Yeah.
The one thing I would say is I would have extreme skepticism in absolutely any particular case where someone claims affirmatively to have evidence or to have seen a UFO. Yeah. Because, it's so... There's so much motivation. so there's so much motive to fake that sort of thing. Like, it's kind of the stereotypical thing to fake for attention, right?
Yeah. And there's speculation that some alien abduction stories might be like DMT related somehow.
Yeah, or like psychological experiences.
Yeah. I guess so I guess I'm 50-50 on like aliens somehow. I'm 50-50 on aliens already having visited Earth in some sense, or whether it's just technology or whatever. And I guess I'm more skeptical that the U.S. government could keep that a secret for so long, because like that's the thing with conspiracy theories, right? Like, they like to not get discovered. Like, so many people have to keep quiet.
Yeah.
And they're like, in an organization like, as huge as the U.S. government, that like any, not one person could leak out. That would be really hard to do. Although, the other thing people will say is well, people do leak out, but there's this like culture of just dismissing anything that they say is as crazy. Like, I think there's at least a couple people who like formerly worked with the military or in the government that have like said some things about aliens, but it's I think it tends to get dismissed pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even someone working in the military or the government is capable of having a psychotic break or something like that.
Yeah.
So you never know. I want to believe.
I mean, it's also possible that like they're here and they're so insanely different than us that like they're all around us and we don't know they're there. They're like nanobots in the air or something, or they're like part of they're somehow like inhabiting subatomic space itself or something crazy like that. Like,
right.
Yeah. It's
fascinating. Lizard people.
Oh yeah. Hollow Earth / lizard people.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. I'm with you. I feel like there's a surprising kernel of truth in this one, which is just that historically through our monarchical societies, the monarchy, the aristocracy, interbreed with themselves at the exclusion of the peasantry. And over time, that comes into having significant genetic differences, almost to the point, well, probably not to the point, but, approaching toward the general direction of the point that they are a different breed of humans or a different species of creature than we are.
Wow, that's like a really charitable opinion of the lizard people conspiracy. But yeah, because it is supposed to be like the ruling class, right? Like the ruling class is all secretly lizard people.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
Do you have any flies, Trevor? I have a hankering for some flies.
Okay, don't ever do that voice again.
Why are you starting to realize that I am? Oh, what? Nothing. I wasn't going to say anything.
Join us next time on Post.
Thanks for listening.
I have no idea. I have no idea. No way. I have no idea. No way. I have no idea. No way. I have no idea.
I have no idea.
There's no way. One of the children
There's
is
no
still
way.
alive. When I hiding. I realize. I have no one of the children. I still have hiding. I realize that one of the children is still alive.
Stall the
Hiding.
habit,
Make my way. I Install the habit
Make my way upstairs to the after bedroom. The habit close behind me. Install the habit.
See? There's nothing here. There's nothing here.
Install the
No, there's nothing here. There's nothing here. Now, you'll allow me. Now, you'll allow me. Install the habit.
Now, you allow me.
Run back. There's nowhere to run to. There's nowhere to run to. There's nowhere to run to. There's nowhere to run to.